Tonight, we embark on an extraordinary excavation, digging deep into the layers of history, memory, and spiritual truth to unearth a revelation that for far too long has been shrouded in an almost deliberate silence. We are stepping into the story of the Maccabees, a name that, for many, evokes a distant, perhaps even unfamiliar echo from ancient times. It might call to mind a vague holiday, a historical footnote, or perhaps nothing at all. Yet their legacy, once a roaring testament to divine power, to unyielding courage, and to an astonishing spiritual resilience, has inexplicably receded into a mere whisper, a forgotten corner of our collective spiritual consciousness. Why is this? Why has a narrative so rich in potent spiritual revelation, so vibrant in its implications for defiance and deliverance, been allowed to drift into such profound obscurity? This isn't merely the natural erosion of time, you see, the way distant events slowly dim in our minds. No, what we're exploring tonight suggests something far more profound, something far more intentional, more strategic. It's the unsettling realization that certain ancient truths, particularly those that empower the individual, that liberate the spirit, and that ignite a dangerous, uncompromising kind of spiritual awakening, can be deliberately obscured and forgotten. This isn't by accident, but by design. We're talking about a subtle yet pervasive form of historical and spiritual manipulation, a quiet rewriting of the narrative by forces that, then as now, stand to gain immensely from our collective amnesia. Imagine the power of a people who truly believe that divine intervention is real, that a small, faithful few can overthrow an oppressive empire, that purity of worship is worth dying for. Such a belief system is a direct threat to any worldly power that seeks absolute control, any system that thrives on conformity and spiritual apathy. The story of the Maccabees carries such a dangerous truth. Tonight, our sacred purpose is to pierce through that oppressive silence, to challenge the deceptive comfort of forgetfulness, and to ignite within each one of you a fierce, unyielding desire to rediscover what was once held sacred, what was once a living, breathing testament to God's unwavering faithfulness. We must remember this crucial lesson. History, as we know, isn't solely crafted by the victors. It is, with chilling precision, often re-engineered, repackaged, and silently rewritten by those who fear the very truth that story embodies. So I urge you, lean in, open your spirit, and prepare to confront, embrace, and ultimately remember what we were explicitly meant to forget. The echoes of their courage are waiting to be heard. Now, let us transport ourselves, in our minds, to the very crucible of the Maccabean revolt. Picture a time roughly 2,200 years ago, when the powerful Seleucid Greek Empire, heirs to Alexander the Great's vast conquests, cast its shadow over Judea. Under King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, their policy shifted from mere political dominance to an aggressive, almost fanatical, cultural and religious suppression. He sought to extinguish Jewish identity, to forcefully Hellenize them, compelling them to abandon their ancient laws, their Sabbath, their circumcision, and their sacred temple worship, replacing it with pagan rituals and idolatry. It was an assault not just on their land, but on their very soul. And in this seemingly hopeless darkness, a small, seemingly insignificant band of people dared to rise. It began not with an army, but with an aging priest named Mattathias from the village of Modiin. When a Greek officer commanded him to offer sacrifice to pagan gods, Mattathias, filled with righteous indignation, refused. He struck down a Jew who was about to comply, then slew the Greek officer himself. It was an act of profound personal defiance that ignited a national rebellion. His sons, notably Judah, known as Maccabee, meaning the hammer, joined him. This was more than a political uprising or a mere military skirmish. It was a profound act of spiritual defiance, fueled by an unshakable conviction. The Maccabees embodied an almost unbelievable faith, a radical form of spiritual clarity that refused to bend, to compromise, to assimilate, even unto death. The fire we speak of here isn't just the literal blaze of their courageous physical resistance on the battlefield, where they, a tiny, untrained militia, repeatedly defeated vastly superior Greek armies. No, more profoundly, it is the inextinguishable light of truth itself, a sacred flame of conviction that they absolutely refused to let be snuffed out. They fought not for power, but for purity, not for conquest, but for covenant. Their rebellion was the outward manifestation of an inner unyielding commitment to God's divine law and identity. And from this furnace of persecution, from this seemingly desperate struggle, emerged a tangible miracle, an enduring symbol of this unquenchable flame, the miraculous rededication of the temple. Imagine the scene: the temple defiled, idols desecrating the Holy of Holies, the altar polluted. After 3 years of relentless fighting, the Maccabees finally reclaimed Jerusalem and set about purifying the temple. They found only a tiny cruse of pure, consecrated oil, enough for the temple menorah to burn for just 1 day. Yet, by a divine miracle, that oil burned for 8 full days, providing enough time to prepare new, pure oil. This wasn't merely a charming anecdote or a convenient historical detail. It was a profound, living symbol of God's enduring presence and His power to sustain His people, even in the face of impossible circumstances. That flickering flame, defying all logic and natural law, was a beacon of hope and a resounding testament to a truth that even the mightiest worldly empires, with all their decrees and armies, could not extinguish. The light of divine truth, once ignited by faithful hearts, carries an eternal, unyielding power that absolutely refuses to die. It signified that though empires may rise and fall, though darkness may seem to prevail, God's light, when cherished and defended, is forever unquenchable. This fire of spiritual courage still resonates today, pulsating through the ages, waiting to be rekindled within each one of us who dares to believe. So what was it about these Maccabees, this small band of fiercely faithful individuals, that struck such a profound and visceral fear into the heart of a dominant empire? What provoked not just military opposition, but a persistent, almost desperate attempt to suppress and erase their very legacy from the annals of history? It wasn't simply the threat of political or military resistance, formidable as it proved to be for such a numerically disadvantaged group. The Seleucids had faced other rebellions, but this one felt different. The true source of their enemies' terror, and the underlying reason for the insidious silencing of their story, lay in the power of spiritual sovereignty that the Maccabees embodied. They served as a potent, undeniable, and deeply unsettling reminder to the world that a people deeply connected to God, a people whose primary allegiance was to a higher, unseen, and eternal authority, simply cannot be truly enslaved in spirit. Earthly powers, throughout history and even in our technologically advanced present, instinctively tremble before those who recognize and answer to a power greater than any human institution, any government, or any cultural zeitgeist. They fear a people whose conscience is held captive by God's absolute truth rather than human decrees or the ever-shifting winds of popular opinion. When individuals or communities choose to obey God rather than man, when they place divine law above human decree, they become, in essence, ungovernable by purely worldly means. They operate by a different code, a higher standard, and their motivations transcend earthly rewards or punishments. The Maccabees demonstrated this radical spiritual boldness with breathtaking clarity, proving that true freedom is found not in political liberation alone, though that was a result, but in a spirit utterly unshackled from worldly fear, a spirit that knows its true king. This fierce independence, born of an intimate, unyielding connection to the divine, is precisely what modern systems of control, in their relentless pursuit of total influence over our lives, seek to erase from our collective consciousness. They do not want us to remember that true power, true authority, and true peace reside in aligning our lives with the divine. For such remembrance directly dismantles their perceived authority, exposes their inherent limitations, and reveals their ultimate fragility. If we are convinced that God is our ultimate authority, then the pronouncements of any earthly power become secondary, subject to a higher review. The Maccabees story is a dangerous truth to those who wish to dominate, for it reveals that the true strength of a people lies not in their weaponry or their wealth, but in their unshakable commitment to a divine will, a power that no earthly force can ever truly conquer or even comprehend. This is the power they feared, and it is the power they still fear today. To fully grasp the fervent devotion and the fierce, unyielding struggle of the Maccabees, we must delve deeper into the profound spiritual heart of their world, the Temple in Jerusalem. This magnificent structure, for which they risked and sacrificed everything, was far more than just a grand building of stone, wood, and gold. It was, in its profound spiritual essence, a tangible reflection of the inner sanctuary of the human soul. In ancient Jewish tradition, the temple was considered the physical dwelling place of God's manifest presence, the Shekinah glory on earth. It was the sacred nexus where heaven and earth intersected, where humanity could most intimately encounter the divine. Its very design, meticulously detailed in Scripture, from the outer courts where the people gathered, to the holy place where priests served, and finally to the innermost holy of holies, where only the high priest entered once a year. Each element was a deliberate, symbolic blueprint, mirroring the sacred space God desires to inhabit within each one of us. It served as a constant physical reminder of the intimacy and holiness of God's desire to dwell among His people, not just in a building, but within their very beings. Therefore, the Seleucid desecration of the physical temple, their audacious introduction of idolatrous practices, the sacrificing of unclean pigs on the sacred altar, the overt and brutal attempts to suppress Jewish religious life and force Hellenistic customs, was not merely an act of political tyranny or cultural suppression. It was, in a profound and chilling sense, a potent symbolic act, mirroring the spiritual corruption and defilement of the human heart itself. The desecration of the external temple reflected the insidious ways in which worldly values, pagan influences, and self-serving desires can subtly but powerfully corrupt our inner sanctuary, leading us away from purity, from holiness, and from genuine intimacy with God. The Maccabees, with an intuition far beyond mere religious zeal, understood this profound spiritual connection. Their fierce and bloody fight to purify and rededicate the temple was at its very core, a battle to reclaim not just a physical structure, not just a set of religious practices, but the very essence of their spiritual identity, to restore the sacred connection between humanity and the divine. They knew that if the external sanctuary was defiled, the internal one would inevitably follow. This ancient struggle resonates with astonishing power with our modern predicament. Today, we face a relentless onslaught of secularism, materialism, moral relativism, and distracting noise that subtly, yet powerfully, seeks to desecrate the temple within us. It tries to replace the divine presence with fleeting pleasures, to replace enduring truth with shifting opinions, and to replace sacred purpose with self-gratification. The Maccabees remind us that the fight for our values, for our identity, and for our holiness is fundamentally an internal one, a continuous and vigilant commitment to guard and purify the sacred space where God desires to reign supreme in our lives. This inner war for our sanctuary is as vital now as it was then. The battle for the Maccabees, that fierce and seemingly miraculous struggle against overwhelming odds, did not cease when the revolt itself subsided. Oh no, the conflict merely shifted, transforming into a far more subtle, insidious, and arguably more dangerous form, the erasure of memory. This is precisely the kind of spiritual warfare, often unseen and silently waged, that we are deeply engaged in today, perhaps without even realizing it. The story of the Maccabees, with its vibrant lessons of unshakable faith, courageous defiance, and astonishing divine intervention, is conspicuously absent from the prominent narratives of our time. It is rarely taught with emphasis in secular education, seldom celebrated with the reverence it deserves in many religious circles, and hardly ever meditated upon for its profound spiritual insights. And this is not because it lacks relevance. Quite the contrary, it is because its lessons are dangerously relevant to our modern spiritual landscape, too potent for the powers that prefer us ignorant. This systematic forgetting, this quiet fading of a pivotal narrative, is not some passive process, a mere accident of history or a consequence of historical distance. It is, I contend, a deliberate cultivation of spiritual amnesia, a powerful tactic of control wielded by forces, both visible and invisible, that seek to disarm us. When we lose touch with the heroic narratives of the past, when we forget the astonishing ways in which divine power intervened on behalf of a faithful few, we become profoundly susceptible to new forms of spiritual and cultural oppression. Our spiritual muscles, once strengthened by such inspiring examples of courage and perseverance, begin to atrophy. Our capacity for holy defiance, for standing firm against the relentless tides of compromise and conformity, slowly diminishes. We become easier to manipulate, easier to control, easier to subdue. Forgetting, then, is not just a personal failing. It is a critical battlefront in the ongoing spiritual war. If we are unaware that a small dedicated group, against all human logic and military might, could overcome an oppressive empire through God's strength, then we are far less likely to believe that we too can stand against the seemingly insurmountable odds of our own era. If we forget the cost of freedom, we become complacent with its erosion. If we forget the power of righteous anger against injustice, we become accustomed to apathy. The war on memory is a profound war for our present and, critically, for our future. For if we are deprived of the powerful truths of what once was, if those echoes of divine intervention are silenced in our hearts, we become disarmed, unable to envision or contend for what could be or what must be. The Maccabees, in their very existence and the tenacity of their fight, understood implicitly that memory is power, and that to allow memory to be erased is to surrender not just our past, but our very spiritual inheritance and our future freedom. And yet, despite the pervasive spiritual amnesia that attempts to cover it, despite the deliberate attempts to bury their story, the spirit of the Maccabees has not perished. It is not confined to the brittle pages of ancient scrolls or the faint echoes of distant history. The call to spiritual resistance, to radical purity, and to profound divine renewal is not merely a historical footnote. It is remarkably rising again in our very own time, stirring in unexpected places. This section introduces a profound and inspiring truth. The hidden ones are among us. These are individuals, often unrecognized even by themselves, whose hearts still burn with an inexplicable longing for divine truth, a deep unease with the spiritual compromises and superficiality of the world, even if they don't yet fully grasp the ancient source of that profound fire within them. These hidden ones are not necessarily leading great public movements or standing on prominent platforms, though some may. More often, they are ordinary people living extraordinary lives of quiet conviction, feeling a resonant echo of that ancient defiance. They are the restless ones, the ones who sense that something is deeply amiss with the direction of culture, who feel a quiet, insistent call to live with integrity, to seek genuine holiness, to defend truth, even when the world dismisses it as outdated or irrelevant. This inner prompting, this spiritual unrest, is not random. It is, I believe, the spirit of the Maccabees awakening within them, recognizing the sacred inheritance they fought so valiantly to protect. There is an unbroken chain of light that stretches from those ancient, faithful warriors to the modern soul seekers who yearn for something more, something pure, something eternal. You might be one of these hidden ones. You might feel that stir within you, that quiet but persistent call to a deeper walk, a more authentic faith. This feeling is not an isolated phenomenon. It connects you to a lineage of divine light that has persisted through every attempt to extinguish it. This chapter powerfully encourages you to examine your own heart, to see yourself as part of this eternal tapestry, to recognize that the fire of truth and righteousness that flickers within you is profoundly connected to a lineage of divine passion and purpose. The hidden ones are those who, consciously or unconsciously, carry the flame that illuminates the pathway back to what was meant to be remembered, beckoning others to join in the sacred act of recalling and rebuilding. The story of the Maccabees is undeniably a testament to a profound spiritual reality that we desperately need to reclaim. True faith, when fully embraced and truly lived, is never passive. It is a powerful, active, and often unsettling force that can manifest as sacred defiance. This is not a call to take up physical arms against flesh and blood, but a direct challenge, a holy rebellion, against spiritual compromise and the insidious influences of a fallen world that constantly seeks to conform us. The Maccabees, in their unwavering commitment to God's law and His sacred covenant, unequivocally refused to conform to the dominant Hellenistic culture of their time. This was a culture that actively sought to dilute their faith, erode their unique identity, and ultimately erase their distinct heritage. And so, in our own era, facing similar pressures to assimilate, neither should we. This chapter serves as a resounding call to awaken the defiant holiness that resides within you, to truly grasp that genuine faith is not a gentle acquiescence to the status quo, but a bold, often radically countercultural stand. When the world clamors for conformity to its ever-shifting standards of morality, truth, and identity, sacred defiance chooses unwavering conviction, rooted immovably in eternal truth. When societal systems promote spiritual apathy, moral relativism, or outright godlessness, faith transforms into a quiet yet potent revolution of the heart, mind, and spirit. It's a rebellion that begins within, then radiates outward. The Maccabees demonstrated with their very lives that radical obedience to God often appears as outright rebellion to the world's established order. Their refusal to offer pagan sacrifices, their insistence on maintaining the covenant of circumcision in the face of brutal persecution, their unwavering observance of the Sabbath, these were not minor acts of religious practice. They were revolutionary statements that directly challenged the authority and legitimacy of a hostile empire that claimed ultimate dominion. True faith, when authentically lived, transforms us into revolutionaries, not against people, but against the spiritual forces of darkness that tirelessly seek to enslave our souls, distort our divine purpose, and sever our vital connection to the Most High. It is a rebellion rooted in the deepest, most passionate love for God, a bold and unyielding refusal to bow to anything less than His truth, an act of profound liberation that shakes the very foundations of worldly power and fear. It is time for sacred defiance to rise again. In the aftermath of any great war, any profound struggle, after the dust finally settles and the cacophony of conflict eventually subsides, what often remains is a profound and sometimes unsettling silence. This silence can feel empty, even desolate, after the intensity of battle. Yet it is precisely within this quiet, often overlooked space that the most profound truths can be discerned, where the voice of God often speaks most clearly and deeply to our spirits. This chapter invites us to contemplate the quiet aftermath of the Maccabean revolt, the moments when the roar of battle diminished, and the long, arduous, meticulous work of rebuilding not just physical structures, but also spiritual foundations, truly began. This period of quiet after the storm represents a sacred space, a holy responsibility to not only remember, but to cherish, to guard, and to embody those truths, even when the rest of the world has chosen to forget them entirely. The voice in the silence is multifaceted and deeply resonant. It is, first and foremost, the divine voice, the quiet, persistent, yet powerfully authoritative prompting of God Himself, calling us to remembrance, urging us to maintain unwavering vigilance over our spiritual heritage. It is also a profound ancestral voice, the echoing wisdom of generations of faithfulness, the silent whisper of those who fought, endured, and sacrificed so that truth, holiness, and the freedom to worship might endure for those who came after them. This quiet call is one to perpetual remembrance, to an unbroken spirit of worship that transcends circumstances, and to a vigilant guardianship over the sacred inheritance they passed on. In our loud, distracted, and often spiritually deafened modern world, it is incredibly easy to miss this essential voice, to drown it out with relentless noise, endless information, and the ceaseless demands of busyness. We are constantly bombarded, leaving little room for quiet contemplation. But the Maccabees, through their enduring example, remind us of the immense power found in holy stillness, in intentionally creating space to seek divine counsel in the quiet, undisturbed corners of our lives. It is in this profound silence, away from the clamor of the world, that the deepest convictions are forged, the truest spiritual strength is discovered, and the unwavering commitment to God's eternal truth is profoundly renewed. Listen closely, for the same divine voice that guided and empowered them through their darkest hours still speaks today, and it calls directly to you, beckoning you to remember, to rebuild, and to carry forth their light into a world that desperately needs it. Now let us draw this ancient cosmic struggle, this incredible narrative of defiance and restoration, into the most intimate and personal realm of all. Just as the Maccabees heroically reclaimed, painstakingly purified, and joyously rededicated the physical temple in Jerusalem, we are each called to an equally profound, ongoing spiritual task, to cleanse, restore, and rebuild the temple within ourselves. The scriptures teach us with breathtaking intimacy that our bodies are indeed temples of the Holy Spirit, sacred dwelling places where God's very presence desires to reside and be honored. But in the relentless currents of the world, in its constant barrage of distractions, its subtle compromises, and its pervasive influences, our inner sanctuary can, unfortunately, become corrupted, neglected, or even subtly desecrated by false idols, fleeting desires, and spiritual apathy. This chapter serves as a deeply personal guide to a profound spiritual rededication, inviting each one of you to courageously confront and honestly address those areas of your own life that may have been compromised, neglected, or subtly defiled by worldly patterns and influences. Ask yourself, are there compromises you've knowingly or unknowingly allowed to take root in your heart or mind, perhaps out of fear, convenience, or a desire for acceptance? Has your primary focus gradually shifted from an unwavering devotion to God to a pursuit of other things, be they material possessions, worldly status, or fleeting pleasures? Have you permitted anything to subtly defile the sacred space where the Spirit of God yearns to dwell in purity and power, to truly be glorified? This is a compelling call to a heartfelt return to purity, to clarity of purpose, and to a deeper, more profound intimacy with God. It's about taking an honest, courageous inventory of your spiritual landscape, identifying and casting out what does not belong, what defiles, what distracts, and then intentionally dedicating every single aspect of your being, your thoughts, your desires, your words, your actions, your very will, back to Him. Just as the Maccabees meticulously restored every stone, every sacred vessel, and every proper ritual of the temple, so too are we called to a thorough, loving, and intentional restoration of our inner lives. This ensures that our personal temple becomes a fitting, vibrant dwelling place for the Most High God, a radiant beacon of His holiness in an increasingly dimming world, mirroring the divine purity that was so miraculously restored in Jerusalem. This is your personal rededication, a sacred act in the ongoing cosmic narrative. And now we arrive at the spiritual crescendo of this entire message, a truth that, when fully grasped, should ignite an unquenchable, holy fire within your very soul. The profound truths, the very essence of uncompromised faith, the unyielding principles, and the sacred, life-giving covenant that the Maccabees fought, bled, and ultimately died to protect, they have not vanished into the mists of time. They have not been utterly lost, buried beneath the dust of millennia. No, these sacred truths live on, eternally vibrant and powerfully relevant, specifically within those who dare to remember. You are not merely a distant observer of history. You are, in a profound and astonishing sense, a living vessel, a modern-day steward of what the enemy so desperately tried to bury, to manipulate, and to erase from human consciousness. This final chapter instills within you an undeniable sense of holy inheritance and profound responsibility. Understand this deeply. You carry within you the powerful legacy of their sacred defiance, the vibrant echo of their unwavering faith, the unyielding spirit of their uncompromising purity. It is both an immense charge and an incredible blessing. It is a charge because you are now called, in this very generation, to embody and live out these vital truths in a world that desperately needs them, a world that is starving for authenticity, for moral courage, and for divine light. You are called to be a living testament. And it is a blessing, because in this call, you are connected to an unbroken ancient chain of faithfulness, empowered by the very same spirit that moved those ancient heroes to perform astonishing feats of courage and devotion. Their story is now part of your story. So remember their struggle, deeply recall their immense sacrifice, and never forget the astonishing victory God granted them. For in your remembering, in your living out these truths, you not only honor their extraordinary legacy, but you actively participate in the ongoing, eternal triumph of light over darkness, of truth over deception, and of God's sovereignty over all earthly powers. Walk boldly, then, in the full knowledge that you are a living, breathing testament to what was meant to be forgotten, and by your very life, by your conscious choices, and by your unwavering faith, you powerfully declare that God's truth will always ultimately prevail. The fire still burns. Will you carry it forward? Please take a moment to subscribe to this channel if you're passionate about uncovering the deeper revelations of God's Word and challenging the narratives that have kept us from the fullness of His truth. If you found strength, clarity, or encouragement in what you heard tonight, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps more people discover these truths, and it may just be the spark someone else needs to reclaim their own divine identity.